Dr. Dolske, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, are dating apps healthy for Gen Z, and can we make a case for them?
Can we make a case for them? Okay. I think yes, we can make a case for them. As far as the healthy, as with any other technology, it has to do with the way in which we're using it. So I think we'll just go with Aristotle and everything in moderation. With the dating apps, what has happened is it is taken away from a culture of interaction, of meeting, of communicating, and we're reducing people to a two-dimensional version of themselves, which is the photo that gets swiped on. And there's kind of this game. So what had happened pre, dating apps, pre interwebs and all that stuff, chances are whoever you were going to marry or who you were going to be with was somebody that you knew from your inner circle. You had been set up by your friends, by your religious organization. Maybe you met at university or your family. So you were connected somehow to whoever it was that you were dating and going to marry. Then what happened with the internet is that that's no longer the case, which means that you can meet somebody that you have absolutely no connection to whatsoever. You don't have any people in common at all. Now, one of the good things about it is it allows people to go outside of their circle for dating. And what has happened over the years is that people don't when they're dating or they're in relationships, and this is friendships as well, the glue isn't necessarily ethnicity, geography, even economic bracket. It's not even first language or religion. That's not the glue that it used to be. The glue is similar interests. That's what'll connect people together. So, for example, in university, you can have two students from different areas of the country that have completely different upbringings, but then they're together in, let's say, a psychology class, and then they have to do a group project, and then they become lifelong friends, or maybe even more than that after that. And what was it? It was the common interest in the working together that brought them together. So, that being said, the advantage to dating apps is that you have a chance to get outside of your circle. You get to be with people that you wouldn't have otherwise met. And that's a really beautiful thing. The problem also is that you've seen people be very rude, very crass, hypersexualized, saying awful things to each other because there is no social cost. So when you were dating somebody, when there was a connection with family and community, you would not be so cruel to somebody because there would be a social cost. Everybody knows that person. You have a connection. Now people are interacting who have no connection whatsoever and are being really cruel. And it's because there's no social cost to that whatsoever. So I think that we want to be very careful about reducing another human being to just a picture, a thing, a fantasy, fetishizing somebody, let's see, based on their ethnicity or something like that. That's one of the conundrums that's happening. But I've also found that, some of my students have said, hey, look, the dating apps are also in a way, like if you're not straight, if you're not heterosexual, it can actually be dangerous to try to interact with somebody if you don't know if they're the same way as you. And a safety measure would be through the dating app where you can just go ahead and find somebody who is into the same things that you are or has the same orientation as you do. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but that's also one of the bonuses to it.
So, how do Gen Z benefit and receive detriment from these kind of frictionless sources of quasi love? Are they most at risk, or can they, in the same breath, derive the most benefit from them?
We seem to be seeing a lot of rates of depression is going up, and self-esteem is taking a hit, and people are modeling themselves over, let's say, an idea of the way that they think they're supposed to look and pose. I don't know. I don't think that there's any evidence that it's actually, I haven't seen any evidence. Wait, I should clarify. I haven't seen any evidence that it is actually healthy or good. Um, there is something, I think that what's happened is that we don't like to be embarrassed. We don't like to be shamed. So our efforts to eliminate that have actually eliminated what it means for us to be vulnerable and to be human. We don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be embarrassed. We don't want to be rejected. So what we've done is we've done our best to try to remove that from the equation. And that's what these dating apps do. Like instead of going up and approaching somebody and them rejecting you in person, it's just a swipe. You don't have to deal with that. But the problem is that, and this might sound strange, but rejection or let's say embarrassment is actually a good thing to experience because it gives you so much more empathy. It makes you so much more human for your future relationships. So, like, let's just say, as opposed to ghosting, where you just exit without any kind of a dialogue, anything, no face to face. And let's just say you don't have any friends, family in common. Well, hopefully not family, but friends in common, no social groups, and the person just disappears and it's devastating. um, you learn so much more by having an interaction with somebody and talking about maybe that you are going to make an exit. And that makes you better for the next relationship. And the person who's on the receiving end of that, while it sucks, that also makes them more cognizant in any other relationship that they get into. The other thing I want to say is that it's important to go ahead and mourn the loss of a relationship or even a crush. Let's just say there's been people who have had, 3-week romances and then it's over and they're sad. And it's okay to be sad. But with the dating app culture, what people will say is just get on your phone and swipe, swipe, swipe. Just get back on it. You're not even allowed to mourn the person, like you're not supposed to. And I say, hey, look, somebody broke your heart. You go ahead, listen to a few sad songs, get that ice cream, and do a Netflix binge, and then resurface in a few days. But give yourself that time. This idea that you're supposed to get back on the app as though that will give you some sort of a self-esteem boost, it will not deliver in that way. So that's one of the things that I see. I don't want to be so hard on dating apps because, like I said, I know that it can bring about this good. It can streamline and make things safe for what it is that you do want. You can be more aware of that. But one of the problems is this fast-paced way of dehumanizing oneself and dehumanizing other people. So we have to, I think, maybe have more conversations like this one about how do you avoid that?
Is it just a conversation about avoidance, or is there a conversation to be had, maybe between parents and children, maybe teachers and students, about how to use dating apps in a healthy manner? So instead of, refusing the mourning of a loss by swiping, can you actually use the dating apps, Monday and Friday to look for a relationship, as well as maybe go to the coffee shops or go to the library or bars or wherever people are meeting nowadays to have that physical connection? Is there a conversation to be had on healthy usage, or is that out of the question as well in your mind?
It's that's a good question. It's like if you have okay. What it's making me think of is that one of my areas in philosophy is moral theory. And there's something about just, let's say, reading something like Immanuel Kant's work, The Categorical Imperative. You can study it, you can learn it. Here are the rules, essentially. But you're not going to walk away and be an ethical person. There's still something missing there. And I feel that way if we're to tell Gen Z, like, hey, do this and don't do that. I don't know that it will be as helpful. You know what does help with moral theory is actually fiction and reading stories, because there is something in the brain that where that experience lights up. There are lessons in, let's say, Harry Potter that I think have more weight and more impetus than Kant's categorical imperative. Don't mean to throw him under the bus, but I think in terms of understanding that there is something more. So that being said, I would give some advice to, let's say Gen Xers, maybe even boomers in there. Tell the story of how you and your significant other met to somebody who's younger. Tell that story. Those stories are fascinating because it's before the internet for a lot of people. And just to say, hey, we met. Oh yeah, I was working here, and your father always came around and passed a note or something like that. Like, I think that that will give a sense of love and vulnerability, taking that chance and that respect for the other person. So I would say, I'm not going to say give up on the list of do's and don'ts. Like, I wouldn't tell people if you're going to take an ethical theory course to ignore Kant. I wouldn't say that either. But I would, I don't want to undermine the value of storytelling, of just from your own family members, from your elders, to say, well, God, I hate calling I'm a Gen Xer and I hate calling myself an elder, but tell those stories about how you met somebody, or a funny story, or a vulnerable, or about how somebody broke your heart.
Mhm.
And then what you did. And then if you're the parent and your teenager has a broken heart, be like, if it's, depending on what they want to do, say, hey, like, let me treat you to go and do something fun. Let's go to a movie, or let's go miniature golf, or whatever it is that people do for fun. Let's go out and do something fun. Let's go out and connect, get off the phone. Let's go out and do that. So I guess that would be my advice.
Right, right. And this question sounds like a follow-up and a non sequitur, but I promise everything will tie in. But what is a healthy relationship, and how can we easily define it for Gen Z who have the attention span of a tweet?
A healthy relationship, I would say, it is one where after you need to have one with yourself. um when you kind of establish what it is that you want and what you enjoy out of life, then it's much easier to be around people who also inspire you. um so I would say have and the way in which to engage in the healthy relationship with yourself, because people talk about self-care, they talk about boundaries, but there doesn't seem to be any like specifics of what is it. Is self-care going out and getting a manicure? I don't think so. I think self-care is when you are paying attention to the way in which things make you feel. So, for example, if you're eating food and it all of a sudden just makes you want to lay on the couch and just watch TV and do nothing else, you are not taking care of yourself. Go for a walk. When you eat something and you still feel like you can go for a walk, that's when you're taking care of yourself. When you are putting the phone down, when you're giving that time for contemplation, you are human beings, Homo sapiens. We are rational beings. We need to allow ourselves long distance movement and time to think. Make sure your food has some color on it, right? If the food doesn't have color on it, if it doesn't have some green or some orange or some yellow in there, maybe pass on it, but not always. I don't want to be totally strict about it, but pay attention to also the activities, how they make you feel. People have asked me, why do I like philosophy? And I just say, well, it chose me. I didn't really
Mhm.
make a decision. All I knew is that I would read it and I felt alive. Or I read certain stories and I feel alive. Other people, they play a certain sport and they feel alive, or an instrument, or they like problem solving, like in engineering, whatever makes you feel alive. So then you take that and you understand that healthy attitude. And then in your relationships, take stock of that too. After you spend time with this person, do you feel energized? Do you feel happy, or do you feel drained? And then that's how you can tell. What is it that's working? Are you inspired? Do you respect this person? Do they have a talent and you just want to cheer them on? Do they cheer you on? Do they want to hear about your good days, or are they just only interested in your bad days? That's the kind of thing where you want to pay attention to what is healthy. And I think that establishment of friendship is key then for a romantic relationship, because a romantic relationship without the friendship is not really a relationship. That's just a lustful thing, which I'm not down on, like that's fun too, but that's not long-term romance. You've got the lust and the attraction, but that friendship has to kick in, where this person, you respect that person and they respect you. And what I mean by respect is that, I mean, I can honestly say this about all of my friends, the people I'm close to, even my podcast partner, Rudy. I adore him. And why? I'm amazed by him. He's a lawyer. He loves music. He loves film noir. He has written some science fiction under a pen name. The guy is multi-talented, and his wife is amazing too. She's a general surgeon. They've got 2 kids. They love to travel. Like, you can hear by the way I'm talking about my podcast partner that he's just top tier to me. I think he's amazing. that's how you should feel about your friends. That's what I mean by energized by them. And then in your romantic relationships, you should want to be able to brag about them.
It seems a little more difficult for Gen Z because, okay, just taking a step back, when we're looking at healthy relationships with yourself, Gen Z grew up on social media. They've had this kind of digital reputation merged in with their physical social reputation as well. And then they're constantly seeing on social media influencers that just don't conform with how people normally look. We'll say it like that. They're
Mm-hmm.
constantly getting, well, I'm sure we'll touch on it, like dopamine hits from the notifications, all the followers, and they feel like shit afterwards. And
Yeah.
then in order to mitigate that, they go on social media again. So you get this downward spiral. Can you say anything about how to get Gen Z out of that spiral? How to get them kind of like, okay, guys, we understand what situation you're in. We understand that these are kind of circumstances beyond your control, but here's how to regain some normality, some normalcy in a relationship with yourself, and then build on that. Start being able to brag about yourself.
Yeah. This is so hard. I like social media too, so I'm not just on a soapbox, wagging my finger. I love TikTok. Their algorithm is perfected. It is amazing how the
Scary.
time will go by. I love it. I'm actually a little tired of Instagram. I really don't care for Facebook, but TikTok is my favorite go-to. So I just say that to be very clear that I am not finger wagging.
You're not a
I
Luddite.
th- yeah, I I think, and this goes back to my roots in philosophy, the idea of what does it mean to live life well. And this was something that Socrates talked about in the trial. I hope I didn't lose anybody by saying this,
Not at
by
all.
starting out that way.
Not at all.
But it's this idea that what's the difference between a good man or a man of worth and a man of little worth? And the difference really was what's going on in the soul, what's going on in the mind. For anyone who doesn't think there's a soul, let's just say the mind or the character. It's that character development. Are you thinking about what is right and wrong, what is righteous, what is just before you act? Because the person of little worth is thinking about fame or their body before they act. They're not thinking about what is right and what is wrong. Now that might seem a bit too um big, right? We're not always thinking about justice or anything like that. But I would say what we want to think about is what are your talents? Become obsessed with, let's say, a sport or art or architecture, or just become obsessed with crafting something. Get to know like different nature walks. Become obsessed with something that will also make you grow, where the next day somehow you are better as a result of that. I feel that way about reading. I feel that way about like, oh, this is a story. This is I just picked up a children's classic the other day because I'm like, I've never read this and I've always wanted to. It's A Wrinkle in Time. I've never read it and I thought I want to. So I just become obsessed with knowing more about the great stories that are out there. That's how I get off of TikTok. And when that is so good, I don't want to be on social media. I'm too busy indulging my own interests. So we have to figure out what those interests are first. This is what happens. I would also give this advice, and I do follow this advice. This is probably the most difficult thing to do. It's so simple, but so difficult. Do not look at your phone first thing in the morning. And I don't care what else you do first thing in the morning. Say a prayer, do a yoga pose, let the dog out, put water on your face, make the bed, do something. I think even if it's small, other than look at your phone first thing in the morning. And here is why. Because when you look at your phone, you are put in response mode. You are not thinking of yourself. The first thing that you are doing, especially if you get on social media, is you are looking at what either other people are doing or what other people think of you. So you're
Mm.
starting your day with your mind focused on other people's thoughts and actions. What are they doing? Or what do they think? How many likes did I get? Start out the day with obsessed with what it is that you want to get out of it. What do you want to read, learn? Who do you want to talk to? Or do you want to just rest? I don't want to make it sound like you always have to be on the go. Do you want to just rest? Do you want to stare at the ceiling for a bit, listen to some music or a podcast, but think about what it is that you want to get out of the day first. And that will really help get out of the mindset, because you're right. The social media thing, it's like with the dating apps, it's turned into a game to see how many likes you can get, what kind of content you can create, what can you mimic. And I think in a way it's actually stifling our creativity, because you're in this game of trying to mimic other people's formats and rules. Like I get on TikTok, and there every once in a while someone will pop up and be like, this is how you go viral. This is how you do that. And then I start to watch it, and then I have to think, well, what? I don't even want that. I don't, that has nothing to do with me. I'm going to go back and read my books,
Right.
but
Right.
you get sucked into this idea of somebody else telling you how you're supposed to be, and it's exhausting.
So I think we're kind of writing a narrative right now. So we're always in response mode whenever we're picking up our phones, whether it be in the morning or in the middle of the day or at night. I think, the former and the latter, in the morning and at night, are the worst times to use your phone, because you don't want to go to sleep thinking about what other people think of you or what other people are doing. And you don't want to wake up and have the first hour of your day thinking about those same things. So you get empty by being in response mode because you're thinking about everybody else but yourself. So you don't have time and you don't have um, brain power to think about yourself and how to build that healthy relationship with yourself, to be obsessed about the books or the instruments or the nature walks. And correct me if I'm wrong, in order to fill that gap, we start swiping, because that is the most frictionless way for us, other than going out, seeing a pretty girl or boy, or they, them, and
Mhm.
getting rejected and having to come home and deal with that embarrassment and that, mournful attitude. So instead of going through all of that hassle, we just swipe. And then
Mhm.
unfortunately, we feel more pain. We feel emptier because maybe we don't get the responses from the swipes, or we see all the pretty people on the applications, but we don't feel as pretty as them. So is that good so far? Because I want to take it one
Yeah.
step further.
Yeah. And the other the other thing I'll say, like when you said is prettier or whatnot, or is attractive with the photos, there's so much a photo doesn't tell. You can be attracted to
Mhm.
somebody by the way they carry themselves, and no photo
Mm,
really conveys that.
right, right. Yeah, that is an interesting facet, is that you're only attracted, like it's a very superficial attraction. I think that's quite obvious, but I think you just highlighted a very interesting and important point, which is you're only attracted to them in one aspect of attraction. You're not actually
Hmm.
attracted to their entire personality, and you physically can't, or you literally cannot be, because you don't have all of that information. That is interesting. But the extra layer I wanted to put on that is taboo, but the use of pornography now in, modern society. Where is that relationship, technological relationship to pornography going for folks and primarily Gen Z?
Now, this might be shocking, but this is something that liberal and conservative thinkers actually agree on.
Hmm.
This is something they agree on. So you can have somebody like Jordan Peterson
Mhm.
and Liz Plank. Liz Plank wrote For the Love of Men. So she's a feminist thinker, has done a lot of work on problems with patriarchal societies. And then you've got Jordan Peterson, who loves patriarchal societies and sees nothing wrong with it.
Mhm.
Two people who could not be more opposed agree on the problems with pornography.
Mhm.
Everyone is in agreement that it is a problem. Now, this might also sound taboo. I'm a little bit nervous about how this will sound. Pornography in and of
Mhm.
itself isn't a problem.
Right. Right.
It's always been there. It was sometimes used as an aid for marriages that had kind of lost their pizzazz, and this was just supposed to spice things up. There's actually such a thing as feminist porn, like it exists. However, what has happened is that because it obviously makes a lot of money, it is, and everybody's got the internet now on their phone, the temptation to look at it constantly and often, and the amount of money that it makes, because it's international, right? Like that's how, even if your own country has laws about what can and cannot be had, I mean, you can still have access to it because of the internet from international pornography. So the prevalence of it that everybody's agreeing on, the more one is watching it, and men tend to watch it more than women, although women do watch it, but men tend to watch it more. The problem is the more you are watching it, and then the more one becomes aroused by those images, the less likely they're going to be able to experience arousal in front of an actual person.
Mhm.
So that is becomes an addictive thing, because you're just in this constant pleasure seeking state, and the only thing that will do it for you is more of this pornography. Now, one of the issues is that pornography, and this is very disturbing, but it's becoming more and more violent, particularly towards women, and that's actually the more popular stuff that's out there. So what is happening is that people who are very young, so now we're talking about like probably in Gen Alpha, people who are very young, who maybe in the United States, we don't have very good sex education. We just don't. People just don't want to talk about it. And if you don't talk about it with your kids, the internet will get to them first. And so there's a lot of debates right now in the United States about, oh, it's too young to be doing sex ed to kids who are this young. But listen, they have access to phones. And if your child doesn't have access to a phone, they are going to find a kid in the neighborhood or another friend who is going to tell them or show them stuff on the phone. That's chances are pornography is going to be the first sex ed lesson. And because it is so unrealistic and it can be violent towards women, even young girls are thinking this is what it's supposed to be. And then what happens is that when there is an actual interaction, maybe when they're older, it's so unsatisfying for both parties. It's so unsatisfying that people are not investing in having sexual relationships. There's actually a sex recession going on now. People are having less sex now than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. That is so strange to me to think that my mom's generation was having more sex than the current generation. So, and the reason is because they're addicted to their phone. First of all, they're too busy. They're addicted to their phone. They're addicted to pornography. They don't have time for relationships. The sex is bad because everybody's trying to mimic what they maybe saw in porn, and it's so unsatisfying, or they're not taking the time to get to know each other. So the sex recession that we're having is really not just about sex. It makes us rethink, well, wait a minute, what is it? And sex is actually the expression of the things we talked about: vulnerability, communication, love, fun, and maybe some embarrassment here and there, like parts jiggle. There's stuff like that that's going on. Sex is the expression of all of those things. Sometimes just a couple parts, maybe all of those parts coming together: nurture, care, love, communication, vulnerability. So if sex is not there, we're having a recession of it. That means those other things are missing,
Mhm.
because that's what it takes for them to be. So that's why it's so serious. But the pornography is actually scary because people are going to injure themselves. We have to remember there are actors who are playing this role. They have gotten, if it's okay for me to say, they've got a lot of lube, and then they're just trained for the camera to just be able to just go for it. But women's bodies in particular don't work that way. There is an emotional aspect. There's a warm-up aspect. There's lots of parts involved in order for the woman to be aroused. That takes time. Pornography doesn't show that. So what's happening is that young people are trying to jump into things, and it's not pleasurable. It can even be painful. And one there was a study that came out, Peggy Orenstein, she talks a lot about this. She's a journalist who talks a lot about sex ed. And she said what's happening is that if you ask young men and young women, and we're talking like 17, maybe 17 to 23 years old, if they found sex satisfying, and they might both respond yes. The problem is that what constitutes a satisfying sexual experience for a woman or for a young woman or for a young man are two totally different things. So a young woman will say satisfied if the following conditions are met. It didn't hurt and he climaxed. That's all. And I compare that to a meal. Like, would you ever go out to a restaurant, like on a date and say, "Hey, did you like your meal?" And if the young woman said, "Well, I didn't get food poisoning and he liked his dish. So
Mm,
it was great." That doesn't make any sense.
yeah.
So pornography is now the first bit of sex ed that a lot of people are getting, and it is not going over well.
So, what do you think the future in the next 10 years, let's say, looks like if Gen Alpha are growing up from Gen Z slash Gen Alpha are growing up between 10 and 20, and young girls and young boys are looking at this really extreme uh, performance of sex. And I think it's important to mention that it's not just you looking at pornography, it gets more extreme as click. So what you're recommended and what you're into, I think it's been studied and measured, gets more extreme as you get more addicted. And so you could be going from a very vanilla set of wants and likes to a very scary and dangerous
Mhm.
set of wants and likes and very unrealistic. I think it's important to mention that as well. So how do you see, I mean, you're a professor, so I'm sure you're thinking about your students' health in certain ways. And so how do you
Mhm.
see that or those interactions in the very near future?
I yeah, I mean, I know that, like, so I'll have a small audience with my students. The first thing I do tell them, because it always breaks my heart about how many young women are talking about um pain
Mm,
that they're experiencing from sexual from intimacy. And the first thing I say is, like, look, pain is actually your body's alert system. It's to let you know to stop doing what you're doing. The same way when you stub your toe, you immediately retract your foot because you thank goodness for the pain, because otherwise you'd keep moving forward. So pain is your body's alert system. So if that is a painful thing, then that means maybe you need to see a physician, or you are simply not ready. Like, it means stop doing what you're doing. So pay attention to your body. Women have a tendency to allow cultural attitudes to override their inner voice or their gut feelings. They're just more prone to do that than men are. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that, whereas, I mean, we're very sexual beings. I'm actually listening to an audio book right now that's called Sex at Dawn. It was recommended to me by a couple of different people, and it's very interesting, talking about wait, are we culturally trying to force ourselves into monogamous relationships as though that's the norm? Where's the evidence of this? It might not be. So trying to there's more literature out there that is, let's say, talking about sex and intimacy outside of what has been considered to be normal for a very long time. There's another book called The Ethical Slut that talks about all types of relationships outside of a heterosexual one, all the different types. I think it's written by a couple of Gen Zers. So there is stuff out there. So I always want to be very careful of, like, okay, we've got the pornography, we've got some extreme stuff. But I never want for anyone to feel shamed or embarrassed of something that they do find, like, oh, I want to enjoy that, or I want to try that. So my thing is that I'll always just advise that there are conversations around this stuff, because if you want to if I want people to be able to enjoy themselves, to understand how their body works, and to always be respectful and mindful that you're doing this with another person. This other person has feelings, right? Like, I'm not an advocate for ever using somebody. So I want to, like, very gently navigate them in a way of the importance of a, a fun sexual relationship or experience hinges on how well, again, this is like a healthy relationship with oneself, understanding one's own body, understanding one's own needs, and then having a respect for the other person's wants and needs. And then you can have the fun sex exploration type thing. But what we're doing right now is we're cutting off the means of communication to, like, the texting culture, or saying something really crass to a stranger, thinking that sex with a stranger would be somehow better, when actually it's with somebody you really care about and you've communicated with, and that that's the foundation for something that's really healthy and can be fun, and where you can be vulnerable and try new things. So I think, I don't know what's going to happen. I suspect that eventually there's going to be, like, the pendulum is going to swing the other way. I think people are going to eventually get tired of scrolling. I mean, I don't know for sure. I just
Mhm.
don't think it's sustainable, because our mental health, it's not sustainable. I think I've talked about this in my class, and actually on a couple of other podcasts. I call it the Taco Bellization of sex,
Right.
that it's not going to work in the same way fast food and drive-throughs, they all seem like a good idea. They seemed so efficient, but now we can see it's something like 70% of Americans are overweight. We have a very big health issue for the first time. The next generation might not live as long as the previous generation. And this is all health related, and very, very bad eating habits. And the eating habits are forcing us to be isolated. This idea of efficiency means that you're not eating with people, which is supposed to be a social activity,
Mhm.
taking the time for the ingredients, having this manufactured crap, just trying to eat on the go when you're going somewhere. And sex is turning into the same thing in dating. Like, let's be
Right.
efficient, or let's just make sex really efficient, and just, you find somebody you mutually find attractive, and then that's the end of it. And just with Taco Bell or the fast food stuff, it doesn't work. It's going to hurt. And then the same thing with these, like, quick dating app stuff. It's not going to work. It's going to harm our mental health. And we can see the results of that right now. Like, depression levels are much higher amongst Gen Z, and it's not because they're narcissistic. That's not what it is. Some people want to say, oh, they're just so narcissistic, or they're so into themselves. No, they're human like everybody else. That's not what the issue is. We put a phone in front of them and selfies in front of them to continually be trying to present an image of themselves to other people instead of develop character. And that will lead to depression.
Mhm.
Don't focus on your image, focus on your character. Focus on, are you a good listener? Are you a good friend? Are you kind? Are you motivated? What is your talent? Those are all character traits. And that is magnetic. The image is not magnetic. It doesn't do anything for you. Nobody's going to remember the image. People will remember your character. So I think that this image versus character is one of the things that is making it difficult for healthy relationships. And also, this is part of the dating, collision problem. I would also recommend that maybe try getting set up by one of your friends
Mhm.
instead of just swiping. Just see how that goes. See what would your friend say. How would your friend pick out somebody for you? I mean, maybe try that too.
And I think it's important to say, and not set up on IGDMs, set up
Mm-hmm.
in person, set up at a cafe, at some place public, and, in the physical realm, not
Mm-hmm.
in cyberspace.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I think there's something, I don't know, like, I had this assignment that I had for my philosophy of sex and love class, and I haven't done it recently. This was actually pre-COVID, so it was a little while ago, where I asked the students to interview either a grandparent or somebody who's 60 years over, who is had a relationship for a very long time, and how did they meet,
Mm.
pre-internet. And then they came to class and they read off the stories, and they were all just so sweet. It always had to do with, like, somebody went to the shop where the person was working, or the sister tried to set them up. um I would say, maybe give it a go. Like, next time you're in line for coffee, or at the grocery store, or at the subway, like, just give it a small try of saying hello to the person standing next to you, like a complete stranger. Like, just give it a shot. Or next time you're purchasing something from the cashier, look at the person behind the register and just think, I wonder if they're tired from their shift. I wonder if they can't wait to have a glass of wine at the end of their shift. Like, look at people as people.
Mhm.
Start to get into the habit of recognizing that they have an entire life outside of you. And maybe somebody's having a bad day and you can be the best part of somebody's day. Maybe get a coffee for the person behind you in line, something along those lines. Start to practice being human.
It's incredible, and I really hope people do. What you've been saying, is just fantastic and influential. But I just want to push back just a little bit because
Okay.
we touched on something towards the end that I was just thinking about. So okay, I'm in the grocery line and I'm about to talk to the cashier. My perception and my expectation of that conversation might be predicated on my relationship to social media slash dating apps slash pornography. So how do I get out of that mind frame? Because if I'm so used to these, I mean, these are memes at this point, but I'll say it seriously, these porn plots of I talk to the girl for 5 seconds and then we're back at my place, in the next scene, right?
Hmm.
It may seem absurd to those with experience that, this is clearly not how it works. But to a 10-year-old, God forbid, or to a 15-year-old, when they're consuming these contents, this they don't have any prior, so this is just how reality works. And as you were saying, this could very well be their first course for sex education. And so when that 15-year-old who is now a 20-year-old and has been consuming porn for 5 years, 10 years, how do they get out of this? If I talk to her, she 100% has to come back with me. Like, there's no doubt about that. Because when reality does hit them, then the aggression, then the anger, then the frustration comes in. And then they start navigating to dating apps, and then they feel worse.
Yeah. See, I think something that's come to me is that Halloween, when my daughter, who's almost 4, and her cousin, who's 6, and we took them out trick-or-treating, and her cousin, who's 6, is a little bit more outgoing, and she would comment on people's costumes like, hey, I like what you got. Oh, I like that. I like that. So it was actually, she's only 6, and it was a very natural thing for her and a very human thing for her to point and be like, oh, I like what you've got. I like what you've got. Somewhere along the way, we're telling people, don't talk to a stranger. That's creepy.
Right.
Send them a DM. Like, so I think that the natural state is actually to acknowledge people and say hello. We've trained ourselves out of that.
Mhm.
So, I don't know. I just the other day, like I bought something, and I asked the cashier, I was like, did you have a good Thanksgiving? I don't know. I just put something,
Yeah.
Americans, we just had our Thanksgiving. So just something like that. And she just smiled and said, yeah. And it was just a very simple exchange, just reminding myself that, like, yeah, I'm human. I wonder, it was, yeah, Monday after the whole holiday. And I didn't, I didn't feel like going back to work. And I thought she probably feels the same way.
Yeah.
So I think that we can just start out with really simple, that it's actually unnatural. We've taken away from the natural course of things. Um, I know it's so strange for people now, like teenagers now, people in their early 20s, to just say hello to somebody, a
Mhm.
stranger, that's perceived as creepy and weird. So I just say, I'm just saying, start out small without thinking
Yeah.
about the porn.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If you could just, without thinking about the porn scenario, um, I don't know, if you think somebody's shoes are cool or something like that, you can just say something like that. But
Mhm.
that's all I can think of. I don't know how we get out of it. I want to get back
Right.
to somehow being human, because like I said, or when you're asking, like, where's the trajectory of this?
Mhm.
I don't think it's good. I think in
Right.
the
Right.
same way we learned that about food, I don't think this is good either.
Well, I think you touched on the answer and maybe you expounded upon it as well. I think if you're engaging in activities that make you feel empty, don't continue doing those activities. And I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that anyone using dating, generally speaking, anyone using dating apps and pornography, and to a certain extent social media, doesn't feel full at the end of the day. Like, for example, you can spend a month going on Facebook for 8 hours, but by the end of the month, your brain is fried. But if you spend
Hmm.
those 8 hours, reading, playing music, playing instruments, writing books, etc., you'll feel much fuller. And so I think that if we can start teaching younger people to not engage in those activities that make you feel empty, try it once, consume
Hmm.
porn once, use dating apps once. But if you don't
Hmm.
feel full afterwards, then that is a sign, from the soul or from your mind that you shouldn't continue on that path, that it's just not for you. You can go in another direction, and that's okay. And I want to kind of lay up or layer this conversation with philosophy because we touched on so many philosophers: Aristotle, Kant, Socrates. So, putting the ball back in your court, what can Gen Z learn from philosophy?
I think it is, and this might be frustrating for Gen Z, but that there is something really beautiful about slowing down the thought process and looking at the implications and different ideas and just examining them and getting lost in an idea. There's a difference between information and knowledge. And I think that what Gen Z wants is to get to the point. This is even like with TikTok, like, right, get in under 10 seconds. You have somebody's attention. I don't think it's 10. I think it's 3 seconds before somebody's going to decide to scroll.
Mhm.
And so I think that in some ways that's actually kind of nice for me to see, like, oh, okay, wait a minute, can I explain philosophy? Can I hook somebody in that amount of time? But at the same time, that it's important that there is something lovely about getting lost in an idea, and that it's okay, and that that's actually where knowledge and wisdom come about. It's not from information. It's not from just Googling something, because when you Google something, you'll get the information, but it doesn't stick with you. It doesn't resonate with you. So, in the same way, just a classic story would be something like the book 1984. Now, you can Google that and see what happens. But the person who reads it, they will never forget what it was like to finish that book. It's with you. It's in your it's in your gut. They will never forget it. It's a completely different experience, and they can talk about the book in a radically different way than somebody who just got the information, and somebody who just got the information will probably just forget it. But it's like you own it. So that's the difference between knowledge and information. Knowledge requires information. Information is not nothing, but it's not the same thing as knowledge. And knowledge comes about from sitting with the idea, toying with the idea, ruminating on the idea, and that is actually a joyful experience. It's problem solving. It's the reason why we like why all the cop shows and mystery shows are top notch. The reason is because we love problem solving. And if you notice that, like something like a really great Agatha Christie book, or I was just watching Steve Martin's Hulu show Only Murders in the Building, and I'm completely in love with it. And it's just classic in that the way in which these mysteries unfold is that they have to cleverly lead you down a potential path without cheating you and making it not the right path, that somebody else did it. Now that takes 10 episodes to find out who did it, right?
Mhm.
But we're along for the ride because the thinking process and the unraveling is fun in and of itself. And that's what philosophy is. Maybe not as great as Steve Martin puts it together, but that's what philosophy is. It's like we're reading Aristotle. What is the object of life? It's happiness. But we got a whole book about, well, how did he arrive at that conclusion, and how does he justify it? And what does happiness mean? It's the mystery that we're unfolding, and we're working with the ideas. And that can be fun. That can be an enjoyable experience.
This aspect of critical thinking is not just integral for philosophy, but for education in general. I don't think you
Mm-hmm.
can get through high school and especially not post-secondary without, focus, attention span, and critical thinking. So just as a quick question, what do you think about this introduction of ChatGPT in the classrooms? Are you worried about where it's leading younger students? And are you concerned that they're not going to build these critical thinking skills in the long run?
Yes, um, I am. Uh, I think that people in education are going to figure out how to work with it, not against it, but
Mhm.
work with it. Um, but in the same way that, let's say there's like exercise machines, but they can't actually do the workout for me. I still have to do it. And I want to clear my mind. It's the same thing with writing. Like, so this, our AI can do it, but writing is one of those activities where it's me thinking, like nobody can think for me. So we really have to make sure that we're involved in the process, because it's not the same thing as like a dishwasher coming out, right? Like
Mhm.
there's nothing about me being human that requires me to be washing dishes. A machine does that, fantastic. As opposed to writing, that is a particularly human quality. So we want to be very careful that we're not eradicating this very specific human activity, because when we eradicate it, we're eradicating us. If you
Mhm.
lose the capacity for writing, for thinking things out, then you're losing the capacity for being human, as opposed to something like, let's say, the dishwasher. And even the same thing with, we have the vehicle that can get me from point A to point B, but I will still take the time to walk. So we have to find some way where it's like, I'm not anti car, I'm not anti technology, but I still have to do the things that make me human. And
Mhm.
so that's where I think we just need to be careful on how we navigate the technology, because nothing can think for you.
Mhm.
And it'll be a problem if people um, assume that it can, because they're not really getting away with anything. They're chipping away at their own life experience by dwindling down their capacity for thinking. It can't be out. That can't be outsourced.
I 100% agree. And that's what a lot of people don't realize is that they're actually burdening themselves by using these systems. And we were talking about going and doing some activity and feeling empty and, abstaining from doing that activity. But if you're not writing, you're actually abstaining from feeling fuller. Because I think you would
Mhm.
agree that it's almost like a dopamine drip that as you're constructing those sentences, as the thoughts continue to percolate, and then you get to the end and you produce that piece of incredible writing, that's such a fulfilling experience. And for Gen Z to
Yeah.
just not want that, it's quite strange.
And people feel that way also about, about music, about art. Like you've got AI
Mhm.
generated art, and so it's like, that's great, that's very cool. But if somebody still wants to be an artist, they're going to do that, right? Like, because it's an expression of how they want to be in the world. So it's not really going to take things out. The same reason why somebody wants to run a marathon. Yeah, cars exist, but it's like they want to excel in this because it's about their human experience.
So, what advice do you have for Gen Z?
First of all, I love Gen Z. Everybody like, well, like I'm Gen X. So like, well, actually, I think Gen X, we kind of stay out of stuff, but millennials and boomers are hard on Gen Z. Um,
For no
this is what
reason.
I think.
We get
Well,
such a
yeah,
bad rap for nothing.
Gen Z is the most these are some amazing things. There are going to be, well, I know in the American I don't know if this is a global demographic. I think I know for sure it's definitely an American demographic, but the most educated and also the most diverse. There's a lot of exciting things about Gen Z. They're also very clever. And I think that something that they've given a lot of us, see, this is why I think boomers are annoyed with Gen Z, is because Gen Z has looked at like the 40-hour work week and has looked at how they're like working and working and working. And with inflation, they're getting priced out of everything. They're not getting enough in return. And so Gen Z has just been like, had this fuck it attitude, and boomers, I think, are kind of resentful because they never thought to do that.
Yeah,
And
wait,
so
you
Gen
can
Z
do
is like,
that?
yeah, yeah. And so Gen Z is like, hey, look, and they are highlighting the problems with that structure, because they're asking the questions, why am I going to give over my life to a company that is not going to even pay for me to live? why would I do that? And so they're more likely to do things on their own. They're just more creative. Now, that being said, I think that's one of the great things about them. And that being said, I still think that that has to be tailored. That still needs the education, like the time, like it still needs to be enhanced. We still need the training. So it's like they've got this insight and they're saying, no, thank you. And it's really forcing other people to pay attention. But they still need that. They still can't neglect the wisdom of, let's say, the ancients. It's still needed. And the other thing I would say about Gen Z that I think is remarkable, they're also more political, and I think that
Mhm.
that's a combination of things that have personally affected them. So I know in the States, something like school shootings, right? They are directly affected by that, and they're under the age, or they had been under the age of voting, but they still wanted to take action, and they used social media to gain traction about something like school shootings. And so it was really, they were the impetus for a lot more dialogue. There's still a lot more work to do in the United States. I personally am for stricter laws. I know that that's a debate here. I'm for that, but I think that they have launched the conversation in a unique way because they're at the center of it, and then they've got social media. So they don't have the capacity to vote, or they didn't, but they have capacity to mobilize. And that's a
Mhm.
real exciting power. And I think older generations are just used to looking at younger generations and being like, you don't know anything.
Mhm.
And that's just not the case because of the internet with Gen Z. They actually have a lot more at their fingertips. And they interact because of social media. They interact with people outside of their immediate circle and have more of an understanding of people who are different from them. And that's fascinating.
Right. The digital communities that you can build are far greater than any physical community. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
that's just the reality. And I think that the baby boomers are slowly waking up. I think they had this kind of, in an interesting way, rebellious attitude towards Gen Z, where everything we did was just, no, you're too young, you don't understand the world, you know, everything you do is incorrect. But I think now they're realizing, like, oh, some of the things that you guys are doing, not everything, throwing soup at paintings, I don't think, is
Mm-hmm.
is productive, but some of the things that you guys are that the generation is doing is relevant and is practical and actually can lead to social change. So let's
Mm-hmm.
support you. Let's give you more resources. I think that switch
Yeah.
is happening. I think that pendulum is coming. I think we just need more of that. So, Dr.
Agreed.
Dolsky, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for this conversation.
This was great. I loved it.
Likewise, likewise. Where can I know we just talked about the perils of the internet, but where can we find you on the internet?
So I have my podcast is Good as in the Details, and that's on all the places. And then on Instagram, I'm at Prof Dolsky. And then yeah, email is good as in the details pod at gmail.com.
Do you have a TikTok account at
I
all?
do. I think it's at Prof Dolsky also.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect, perfect. Well, we'll definitely leave everything in the show notes. Dr.
Thank
Dolsky,
you.
thank you.